again, since it's been a minute, since I know you've been pilot testing, working really hard pilot testing. So
definitely.
Thank you. Thank
Let me
you.
pull this up, and then I'm gonna give you all a good spiel. All right. So, hi everyone. Thank you for granting me the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. Again, my name is Kamali Klora. I'm a senior at Wayne State University studying public health. And I am a student in the Summer Research Opportunities Program this summer. And so that program is funded out of the Rackham Graduate School, taking undergraduate students across the country to come here and conduct research with leading researchers and at this prestigious institution within their respective disciplines. And so I've just had a blessing of an opportunity to be able to work in the PRC and working under Abby, speaking with Dr. Zimmerman and Brianna, and being able to just get a holistic view of like a different side of research that I hadn't approached before. And just the skill building in itself was really beneficial. So I'll just get right into it. I'm gonna set a timer because I'm gonna practice my time. Okay, so today I'll be talking about the Yes You Race pilot implementation, and Yes You Race being short for Youth Empowerment Solutions, Engaging Youth for Anti-Racism and Cultural Equity. And this is the same presentation I will be using for the SROC presentation on Wednesday. Let me go back. Okay, so this summer I specifically looked at this question in regard to the pilot program: how do kids respond to an anti-racism intervention in middle school? And this question was chosen because after doing a literature review, I found that this topic was novel. So here I looked at a specific component of the program evaluation data and analyzed some general themes throughout that student feedback. For more background, Yes You Race is an anti-racism intervention with the goal of using an adaptive framework to test an evidence-based youth violence prevention program for middle school students focused on empowering youth to address racism and racial discrimination to reduce violence. And so we will look more closely at this framework shortly, but below you can see the conceptual model of the program's progression. Now let's look at what are anti-racism interventions and what they are trying to solve. So anti-racism interventions seek to counter racial prejudice, systemic racism, and oppression of racial groups through a range of ideas and multidisciplinary approaches at the various ecological levels. So at those interpersonal, community, and policy levels. And this is the framework that Yes You Race is adapting, called YES, short for Youth Empowerment Solutions. And we are using the adaptation of YES to reduce youth violence by looking critically at racism. YES is an evidence-based program that empowers youth to look critically within their community and develop positive solutions toward reducing violent behavior. And so students are empowered to look at assets and liabilities within their community and enact positive change. You can see this from the photos here from past YES iterations, whether it's painting a mural, agricultural work, or building a basketball court. These contributions influence positivity within human relations, ultimately reducing youth violence. So how is this connected to Yes You Race? Well, racism is associated with aggression and violence toward ethnic minorities. Racism is also a stressor for youth, contributing to violence, as well as structurally increasing the exposure to these community level risk factors. But it attempts to empower youth to address violence and racism during this critical development period. And I'll talk about the age group and population, and Abby alluded to these things. And when we talk about empowering youth, we use the psychological empowerment theories to inform this process. And what this says is that suggests that individuals can be empowered in these three general ways. So there's intrapersonal component, interactional component, behavioral component. And you see on the right here, the empowerment theory conceptual framework described by Dr. Zimmerman. You can see in these components are adapted within this YES program. And so looking at how empowerment has contributed to these within these three components here. Now, applying this framework to Yes Erase, we're looking at these components in regard to empathy, cultural sensitivity, prejudice, identifying strengths in people, critical thinking about differences, social connections across race, inclusive behavior, social action for undoing racism, and speaking up, with the goal of using these core components to reduce racism. But let's define racism a little bit. So this definition of racism is the one we use for the Yes Erase curriculum. And in her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, Dr. Beverly Tatum defines racism as a system of advantage and oppression based on race. This system sends messages about who we are, who we can be based on things such as the color of our skin or where we come from. This includes policies and practices, incorrect beliefs and actions. And so we use this definition because it is more comprehensive than what we would typically see maybe in a Webster's or an Oxford dictionary. And this talks about the intricate way racism plays out systemically. But it also allows for the students to gain flexibility in their student projects. So for the implementation of the pilot study was performed in a summer school for remediation at a middle school in Genesee County, selected by the school district. There was 5 African-American rising 6th graders, 3 girls and 2 boys. And the curriculum duration was 8 weeks, implemented 4 days a week, 2 hours a day. And so for the pilot, let me make sure. Sorry. So for the pilot program, the program was split into 2 sessions, and 1 new student joined in the 2nd session, but I will only be presenting on the 1st session because that was the one I was fully present for. So for the implementation, these are the methods we use to collect the various evaluation data, and I'll specifically be analyzing the results gleaned from the informal student interviews to address my research question. And this is what I found. After looking through the student feedback, I found 8 general themes about kids' responses to this intervention. So first one being, I know this is small, so we can look at this more later, but we learned new things as the students provided in the feedback. The students like team building exercises and group collaboration. Students felt like there were too much information that they couldn't relate to. They embraced ownership of lessons and having their own space. They enjoyed competition. Students often felt like they weren't very enthusiastic about global and structural issues. Attention was sometimes lost when listening to lengthy lectures or videos. And when brainstorming and group work, the students, and this is something I observed about the behavior and working together, students almost always decided to write their ideas down first individually before sharing amongst their peers within the group. And so looking at some of the quotations here, I'll move you back up to the first general thing, where learn new things under strengths. A student commented, I learned that in 1954, Black and white people couldn't go to school together. Now, this student is referencing Brown v. versus Board of Education, and it's something new that the student learned, but a weakness of that is students may not be able to accurately articulate what they learned because, and I'll talk about this in some of the unexpected challenges and implications, but at the time of Brown v. versus Board of Education, it was ruled that separate but equal was unconstitutional. So this comment shows that the student is learning something, but it may not be as accurate as what the actual information that they're being taught. I'll go down to the second general theme, like team building exercises. Student commented, I love that we worked as a team to do this. And they were referencing the social justice movement project where they made a diorama about Black Lives Matter and the protests. And so based upon the feedback, I looked at what they were referring to as far as some of those exercises and seeing that we should keep these exercises because it maintained engagement. Looking at the too much information that students cannot relate to thing, a weakness was students feel like there were too many clips, meaning this was during our stereotype lesson and we showed Disney clips for the students to kind of get an idea of what stereotypes were and maybe bring it down to the level where maybe they could conceptualize it. But some students felt like they still couldn't relate to it, or it was being over-explained. And so what this is trying to get into is that these strengths and weaknesses will kind of inform how the full implementation will go for YES. But having done this pilot gives us a good grasp of how to really approach these certain problems and what should we keep doing, what should we improve on, and how can we better the program for the students and their experience and the impact they can make with their projects in the community. Okay, and to give you a glimpse of some of the adult feedback we received, here are some of the anecdotes, and this is from the teacher and the coach Abby talked about previously. One was, these lessons are better than the staff training on diversity, which was really interesting. Another one was, I looked at blank student and he's a lot more open than he was in the first couple of weeks of the program. So this was showing that this program really allowed these students to express themselves amongst their cohort and be able to shine and bring contributions to the table with the group and collaborations they were doing. Another comment was, I'd like to teach Yes Erase again next year because I really enjoy the program. So not only are there positives from the student feedback, but from the adults as well, looking at how they had enjoyed or valued the program and how they've seen that value through their students. So here are some of the unexpected challenges. Yes Erase was meant for a multicultural group of students, and this was not reflected in the pilot population. And the pilot was implemented in a remedial summer school program, and some students' reading abilities were below their grade level. So there were challenges there with literacy and being able to break down certain phrases and concepts, but also the COVID-19 pandemic could have been a contributing factor in that. This curriculum proved to be more difficult for fifth graders to conceptualize than we thought, possibly attributed to their age and experience. So a little bit of revision on the curriculum, looking at in the full implementation, depending on the population of students implementing, we can then make those revisions and be able to pivot in the direction necessary that is be more compatible for that age group. And then lack of attendance of the student participants was sometimes a bit of trouble because we had students that may not be there on one day and may miss crucial lessons. And so there was variability in the exposure of some of the content when students were not able to be there for the full 4 days a week. But what does this mean? So Yes Erase did provide a platform for students to think critically about structural issues within society, but also provided an opportunity for students to discuss topics about race and equity with their family and friends. And looking at the feedback, like I'm saying, there are strengths and weaknesses across those things. I think a majority of the feedback from the students was beneficial, whether it was socially allowing them to express their personality or them gaining new information. But I think a real hindrance was some of the content for them, but also thinking of the context of those unexpected challenges and how they've contributed to some of the feedback we have. But here are some of my suggestions. I think the curriculum should be revised to be compatible with the student participants' grade level, potentially increasing comprehension and the project impact. I think before the curriculum begins, there should be an emphasis on literacy and team building, which can improve the students' experience throughout Yes Erase. So, for example, maybe a month before the pilot, giving the teacher who will be teaching the program a vocab list of words to kind of prepare them for those keywords within the curriculum, just so students are abreast to what they can expect. And already in the classroom, they're already doing vocabulary words in the pilot implementation. So incorporating maybe some of these words would probably help, but also maybe some team building exercises, because if, let's say we're taking another summer program and we want these students to be able to work together collaboratively, maybe doing some of those exercises beforehand. So when we're coming into the program, they're already knowing each other and are familiar with their peers. And so it would allow for a better group working experience. And I say more emphasis on reinforming the goal of the project through integrative active learning. So really taking the lessons and putting it into these tangible examples that they could see and being able to interact with, just like the Monopoly game, taking those lessons of poverty and putting it into something they can actually understand and conceptualize that's right there in front of them. So more activities like that. And I just want to acknowledge and thank you to Dr. Zimmerman, Abby, Dr. Agi. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, Abby. And then Brianna, Laney, Susan, Pete, Allison, Kai, and Mara, and SROP, Rackham Graduate School, School of Public Health, PRC, and all of you and your wonderful feedback, and then some grant information here. And just any questions, I have my reference list and the QR code. So if you want to scan it with your smartphone to see those references, that would be great.
Awesome job, Kamali. That was great.
Thank you.
That was terrific. Wait, you took away the.
Oh, I'll go back. I'll go back.
I just want to see how I can do this. How did you even create that? Don't answer that question. I can find out another way. I don't want to take your time. That was terrific, Kamali. One thing is, and you could go and see the chats.